I'm Sai, and welcome to the Catalytic Edge, a LinkedIn newsletter and also on LinkedIn Live. This is the inaugural conversation, and the intent is to go through a little bit of introductions, really explore what the Catalytic Edge is all about, and set the stage for future conversations. Very briefly about myself, I'm a coach and a consultant, and I focus on transformation and change. I partner with organizations to help them really calibrate their business models and operating models to maximize their impact. More specifically, I like to classify myself as a catalyst and an alchemist, helping folks embrace the sacred triad, what I like to call that sacred triad: reality, human nature, and their own identity, through awareness to achieve impact. Very broadly, as background, much of what I'll be sharing is rooted in more than 4 decades of practice and very much rooted in theory-driven practice as well as practice-informed theory. Very key balance between practice and theory. Additionally, feel free to reference 2 sources: Conscious Agility, a book I authored in 2013 with 2 dear colleagues, and likewise, The Anti-Fragility Edge, authored in 2016. With that backdrop, where I'd like to really begin the exploration is really ask the fundamental question of how do we experience reality? Commonly, we experience reality within a sense of fear, sense of awe, if you will, verging on fear. And how do we respond to that reality? And again, very commonly, it's with a sense of control. This dynamic is very, very observable and experienced very readily, if you will, this fear-control dynamic. We commonly find ourselves saying, I feel out of control, or I feel like I have no sense of control, or asking ourselves, really, do I have enough control? Is it too little? Is it too much? Commonly, we're overwhelmed or underwhelmed and generally anxious. In this context, really the intent then is to gain a sense of control and quell and remove that fear. How do we do it? Well, we think about people, surrounding ourselves with people that we can rely on. It gives us a sense of control. We think about in organizations, the organizational structure and the reporting structure. We think about process. What activities are we doing? We think about what work products are we producing or consuming? What templates are we using? How are we measuring things? What metrics are we tracking? What KPIs, if you will, or key performance indicators are we after? What standards have we set up? All of these things, the different tools, the ways we automate things, all of these things essentially, commonly give us a sense of control. Sometimes the illusion of control, and even sometimes when pushed to the extreme, really the delusional notion of control, when reality continues to happen around us. So if we step back again and ask the question, how do we experience reality? We can sort of approach it with an alternative answer and say, let's just acknowledge it. Additionally, then how do we respond to that acknowledgement of reality? Well, quite simply, we've got to work with it. We've got to engage reality. This is what I like to call reality thinking. By acknowledging and engaging reality, we're essentially settling with the fact that it is what it is. It brings a sense of calm in many ways, a sense of urgency nonetheless, to be able to acknowledge and engage reality. In this case, our intent is to, in that acknowledgement and in that engagement, to truly work with reality. But how do we do that? How do we truly approach that? So what I'd like to do next is really consider the past few years and bring all of the conversation thus far into context. If you think about the past number of years, there's been some unprecedented human crises that have manifested, really that have challenged every aspect of life. How we do business, how we leverage technology, who we are as a society, who we are as a sense of humanity. Additionally, we've been challenged in our fundamental notion of normality. What does normal even mean? All of that has ushered in really a societal renaissance, very much triggering a shift in our worldview from more, call it from a traditional worldview to an alternative worldview. And now we're forced, if you will, to reconceptualize our reality and experience, very much so. So as we talk about the unprecedented human crises that have manifested, it really has set the stage for some key things to unfold. Initially, as those crises were manifesting, as we look at the worldview, people really began to search, what is the next normal? What's the new normal? What's the post-normal? What's the better normal? All of these notions, all revolving around normal. Normal being what is common, perhaps familiar, or even expected as we've lived our lives. One of the things I began to quickly suggest is, wait a minute, we have to really recognize there's an abnormal or no normal, the absence of a normal. That's what I mean by abnormal. As I was involved in conversations and emphasized that, I went further and really began to emphasize we need to think about a transnormal, beyond normal and not normal. As such, the worldview really shifted for many people in those conversations, and likewise folks that I've interacted with. In particular, returning to what I said about acknowledging reality. We have to acknowledge that reality really offers a spectrum between order and disorder. Very much so. At the same time, we have to engage in what is in between order and disorder. So now if we think about reality from the vantage point of acknowledging it, two poles, order and disorder, and us engaging in the in-between, this really now begins to offer a very crisp perspective on what it means to go beyond normal and not normal, thus the transnormal and the abnormal that I've mentioned. Let's dig in a little deeper and reflect on the experiences of the past few years. So for some, as the different crises began to manifest, those crises really created too much disorder, too much volatility, too much uncertainty, too much complexity, perhaps, too much ambiguity, VUCA, as we've often heard. We didn't know where the market was going. I didn't know what was going to happen to our customers and our clients, what was going to happen to our businesses. We were remote. A lot of that led to disconnection, not enough connection with one another, too much fragmentation. A lot of disorder really began to stress people in many different ways. On a different front, for some, the crisis actually created too much order, too much stability, too much certainty, too much even simplicity and clarity, quite commonly. What I mean by that, numerous folks that I knew, their personal lives became very much dealing with the same people, the same places, doing the same things every day. The degree of routine and regularity, if you will, to their life began to have them suffocate. They began to thirst even more strongly for variation. It just wasn't enough variation. They began to really experience too much stagnation at that point. So reflecting on order and disorder, they're very relative. As one manifests, the other emerges, as I like to say. I encountered people as such on both extremes that I just shared with you. Additionally, the crisis forced us to really begin to confront what I refer to as the in-between, between order and disorder. We began to ask ourselves very key questions. What are our intentions? Who are we? Who are we truly? Really focusing on our sense of identity. Additionally, we began to really confront reality in terms of what are the different tensions that we've had to deal with, we might have to deal with, that we're dealing with today. That's reality, a collection of tensions. So if you think about our intentions as an expression of our identity, of who we are, it's working in the tensions of reality to manifest our intentions that becomes extremely key. That's the interplay between identity and reality. Other things that we began to really experience and ask ourselves, what are we experiencing? What are we experiencing in the past as we reflect? What are we experiencing now and perhaps in the future? All of these things that we're experiencing in some way is a manifestation of the tensions that I mentioned. How we experience those tensions is really what we commonly would call stress. So in the in-between, as we began to confront that, it's about our identity and our intentions, about reality as a collection of tensions, and really our experience of all that in terms of the stresses that unfold around us and that we generally experience. So how does all this really come together? This is fundamentally what I call the catalytic edge, the edge of chaos, where all these tensions integrate, intersect, and interplay to form our experience, our reality. As such, as I mentioned, the past number of years have really forced us to reconceptualize our reality and our experience. As such, we need to liberate ourselves from this notion of the vicious fear control cycle and really begin to embrace the more virtuous reality identity cycle. Acknowledge reality, work with it, engage it, work in the in-between, between order and disorder. Very, very sort of key way to express the unfolding from the past number of years. As we reconceptualize our reality and experience, some fundamental concepts really begin to establish that foundation. The first fundamental concept is the whole notion of paradox. as we see distinctions around us, elements that are distinct in their own way, this is where the tensions begin to manifest between those distinctions. Think about paradoxes. A paradox as a tension among distinctions that really locks energy. As such, multiple paradoxes can come together, and this is what we commonly refer to as complexity. Multiple tensions intersecting in numerous ways, many different paradoxes coming together in an entangled way. Those tensions really begin to give us a degree of influence in the things around us, a degree of power, likewise, a degree of ability to navigate the world around us. That's what complexity is all about. If we go one step further, we talk about uncertainty and risk. This is the reality that we experience around us. Do we have an aversion to risk? And do we embrace risk management, for example? Do we have an inclination toward risk and really risk-taking? Or are we truly being aware and being risk savvy in what we do? And likewise, uncertainty savvy is another way to express it. Very key distinctions, but very entangled, as we'll explore further. Not only are those fundamental concepts, we get into the area of change, disruption, and crisis, where change may be incremental or as an improvement. Disruption may be more dramatic or radical, and crisis is fundamentally something that is almost demanded change that impacts us. Crisis may manifest and go further to become a disaster, where we need to return to survival and then perhaps return to thriving. Or if it goes further, it becomes a catastrophe, the point perhaps of no return at that point. Three other key concepts. We talk about agility, resilience, and anti-fragility. I like to call these three different muscles that intersect. Agility being our adapt ability. Likewise, resilience, our recover ability. And anti-fragility, our evolve ability, or fundamentally our ability to adapt, recover, and evolve. Three entangled muscles. This is a reconceptualization of the world around us, both personally and professionally. Now, as I've mentioned all these things, how do we best deal with all this? How do we deal with order, disorder, and the in-between? And we really need to look no further than Mother Nature for great inspiration. And Mother Nature offers us a very, very intentional tool, fundamentally, and a collection of tools under the broad label of ecology or ecosystems. As I mentioned, the catalytic edge is where all these tensions integrate, intersect, and interplay to form our experience, our reality. What we're seeking in these conversations is experience-based, practical, insightful perspectives, actionable guidance towards impactful outcomes. That's what these conversations will essentially be focused on. And at the heart of these conversations is fundamentally using ecosystem thinking and leveraging ecosystem thinking to cultivate ecosystems and ecosystem enterprises, or fundamentally ecosystem businesses and organizations. And at that, to cultivate those ecosystems and ecosystem enterprises and catalyze agility, resilience, and anti-fragility. We'll dive much deeper into all these concepts, but this is more or less setting the stage, not more than that. Very generally, think about ecosystems as really collections of stakeholders and their environment and the dynamics that bind them together in one form or another. In that, as I use the word binding, if you will, an ecosystem enterprise is an ecosystem of individuals and collectives, more of an internal ecosystem within a broader external ecosystem that surrounds them. I'll leave you with a few more thoughts around ecosystems. Think about systems as like teams and ecosystems as like communities, and think about what that provokes in your thought process. Systems as a whole have parts. Ecosystems offer a context with content. With systems, there's a tension between the wholes and its parts and their identity. And the system itself has a high degree of identity along which the parts align. For ecosystems, however, in that context, there's a lot of content, but the ecosystem itself does not have that same sense of identity as a system does. Much more to come in this space, but things just that I wanted to begin to get in the thought process. Additionally, we see many conversations right now about ecosystems. And if you truly dig deeper, what we truly begin to find is They're more or less conversations about platforms, technology platforms, transactions on those technology platforms, and likewise networks or the relationships among parties, among things, if you will. But ecosystems are much more than platforms, much more than networks. Those conversations are not about the eco aspect of ecosystems and ecosystem enterprises. Again, much more to come within that. So saying all that, the catalytic edge is really about embracing the edge, harnessing turbulence beyond managing and navigating, flourishing when and where we can only expect the unexpected, not merely surviving, but thriving. We can use ecosystem thinking to transcend, really cultivate and catalyze ecosystems and ecosystem enterprises, to harness the paradoxical, the tensions that I mentioned, and to flourish in the age of entanglement, this notion of order, the in-between and disorder. Many conversations are forthcoming, all deeply rooted in pragmatism, and I'll share many more stories. As I said, what I do is very much a theory-driven practice, and likewise coupled with practice-informed theory. The two are deeply, deeply connected and synergistic. Looking forward to our next conversation. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, any thoughts, all welcome. Again, I'm Sai, and thank you for joining the Catalytic Edge conversation. Thank you.